Hello everyone. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. Everyone in the auditorium can be seated. Welcome all of those of you that are watching online throughout the world, also in the United States. We're picking back up here in the Respect unit. And once again, just to remind everyone, because we have new people asking questions every week, so we want to remind everyone, it's the fourth unit of 5 units that make up the junior high series. And we've had a lot of people recently asking about downloading the books, and they're there on our Facebook page. And you can download right now. You'll find the character, the acceptance, the self-control unit, which we've already covered, and now the respect unit. And you can download all of those. They're PDF files, they're teacher's manuals, and you can download those for free, and you can print them off if you need them. We encourage you, if you would like to get a book, you can always call or email us at info@peacefulsolution.org, or you can message us and we'll work out, or you can just order a book through the website in www.peacefulsolution.org. But you're more than welcome to download them. They're searchable text, so that makes it easy. When you download a book, you can actually search for topics that are in them. So it makes life a little bit easier when you're looking for things. We're going to be picking back up here, turning over to LP 5D. We're in Chapter 5. And of course, we're putting things together that we've used thus far. Chapter 5 is about responding to disrespect. And we're putting together all of the pieces of the puzzle, not just chapters 1 through 4 in the respect unit, but also everything we've covered in the self-control unit, which tonight we're going to be going back to the self-control unit quite a bit. You're going to see how we're going to add more pieces to the puzzle in Chapter 2 and 3 that we covered in the self-control unit about our emotions and anger and how to deal with these things, and of course how disrespect comes from the lack of control of these things. But looking here, we're going to reread the procedure that we're in, but we're going to finish it up, and then we're going to get into Procedure 5 this class. But we're here in Procedure 4. Once again, found on LP Lesson Plan 5, page D. Tell students that responding to disrespect appropriately requires preparation. And we've talked about how we set our minds in advance, and we gather that knowledge to do so. Have students read the sections, be prepared, and preparation requires self-control. And of course, that was found on pages 118 to 121 in the handbooks, and we've already covered that in previous classes. Explain to students that without the important character trait of self-control, the disrespectful behavior of others can provoke retaliation in forms of verbal and physical aggression. Have students complete the accompany exercise found on page 121 in their handbooks and discuss answers as a class. And that's what we're going to be doing, turning over to page 121 in our handbooks here. And of course, the students don't have the lesson plans that we're reading. That's only for the teachers themselves. And as we look over to page 121, look back across the page to 120, we kind of ran through this. We've talked about this quite a bit in the Peaceful Solution classes, and that's the STOP acronym. We've discussed it. We've showed a billboard. We've shown it quite often, actually. But it's very important because it's always easy to go through the acronym, but when it's time to apply it, not so easy. So once again here on page 120, it says an easy way to remember how to practice self-control is to think of the acronym STOP, which stands for Stop, Think, Options, and Proceed. And of course, we see here the S, stop. That means stop and acknowledge that someone is saying or doing something that you feel is disrespectful. And it could be anything. But we need to stop and truly consider, what's taking place. And there's nothing wrong with taking a minute to try to gather your thoughts. And then think about how you can respond. Because once we respond, we're going to have to deal with that response. For every action, there's a reaction. And of course, the next one being options must be considered and weighed. Remember, without self-control, negative feelings can lead to negative actions. It is up to you to consider the possible outcome of your choices. And when you think about how many ways things are done in society today, I don't remember if it was Gatan or William that brought up these new apps where you can take a picture of someone and you can put a song to it, you can put someone saying something to it, and the picture will actually come alive. And some of them are really hard to tell that it's not really the person saying it. And then I recently seen where someone decided to create some fictitious text messages from someone else. So they set up a phone and they saved the the way they saved the ID, they just listed the person as an ID and put a picture in and saved it, and it looked like it came from that person. And I thought, you know, I never thought about it being that easy, but you can literally create a complete false environment just through a little bit of, I won't say hard work, I will say manipulation and, a really corrupt mind. But we live in a society where you can put all kinds of things on the internet. You see it when politicians are running for office. You see things on the internet about individuals all the time. And of course, people tend to think, well, if it's on the internet, it must be true. Well, if everything that was on the internet was true, we would have a really, it would be worse than what it is right now in society. But of course, when we think about these options, we really need to consider the source of those options also. Evaluate, look, consider. And then proceed by making a decision that is morally correct and respectful. Morally correct and respectful. Because remember, when we respond to disrespect with more disrespect, it's like adding fuel to the fire, as we talked about. We want to be able to reduce the tension, and sometimes that's not easy to do. If somebody's wanting to do something that's inappropriate, if somebody's wanting to do something that's illegal, if somebody's wanting to do something that brings harm to someone else and you're trying to prevent it, doesn't mean the person's going to calm down by you showing them respect. Even though you're trying to help them, it doesn't mean that it's going to turn out not in the very beginning. After some time takes place, everything will always work itself out with patience. Could take, 1 hour, 5 days, 20 years. Who knows? It could take some time. But eventually everything will work out. As long as positive character is used, you can never get negatives. But if you use negative character, you're always going to get something that's negative. Here on page 121, at the very top of the page, and of course this is an exercise for the class, and it says, read the problem below. Determine the outcome of the following responses to the problem and write your answers in the space provided. Notice here the problem. Someone disrespects you by calling you a name. You have a choice in the way you respond. You can, and of course you'll see here in these boxes, the italicized, those are empty in the students' workbooks. They're just there for the teachers to give you an idea of the possible answers that you will receive. But you see A here, it says, say something cruel in return and then replay the incident in your mind until you are boiling mad. Remember last class we went back to the self-control unit, and we were talking about once you dealt with a problem, you have to let it go. You can't keep replaying it over and over and over in your mind. And really, once it's dealt with, there's no use to keep the repetition going. It should be, once something is dealt with, it's finished. Replaying something over and over in our mind can truly get the emotions to where they are boiling. You can be so upset about something, and a lot of times you can replay something over in your mind, and by the time you get to the third or fourth day of doing it, you're actually a little bit off from reality of the story itself. You've added a little bit of drama to it yourself through your own way of processing your thoughts. And of course you could gather a little bit of information from one person or another, and that adds to the boiling point. Whether it's true or not could be, that could be up for debate sometimes. But notice here the potential outcome if you were to do that. It says answers might vary but could include your response could start an argument that could become physically violent. By replaying the incident in your mind, you might begin to build up hatred and could seek to get revenge. This could lead to violence and aggression. And of course here with B, ignore the person, but take revenge when he or she least expects it. Now that truly sounds like something that will bring peace, right? Just be patient about getting even. You got to wait till they're down before you get them. Well, you think about that. When someone's down, that's when they need you the most. That's not when they need somebody to kick them in the ribs. Notice here, answers might vary, but could include any act of revenge, whether immediate or delayed, has the potential to lead to aggression and violence. And then, of course, C, tell an authority figure and then choose to ignore it. After all, why should someone's disrespectful behavior ruin your day? And the answers might vary with that, but they could include the authority figure would correct the individual. They would probably receive an appropriate consequence. By letting it go, you can avoid feelings of resentment and retaliation. Well, you would hope the authority figure would do something, and you would hope Not, we're not talking about, taking them out to the local post and strapping their hands around it and taking a wet cane and beating them. That's not what we're talking about. Talking about educating someone, talking to them, trying to get them to see that what they're doing is not going to be positive, and what they're saying is not going to have a positive outcome, and trying to get them to understand why and how they need to change. Just telling someone what they did is wrong is not enough. Showing someone how to fix it is the way it should be. But when anger and emotions get involved, it can almost become impossible to find an agreement. If you go on Google and you start searching what are the most disagreeable moments in a person's life, or just look for disagreements, the first 3 or 4 pages are almost always divorce. When people get divorced, they argue over the dog that no one would ever pet, no one wanted to feed it. They'll argue over the welcome rug that no one ever used. I mean, they will argue and fight over the most ridiculous things because they don't want the other person to get the upper hand. And it's so bizarre when these things take place. And then also sometimes when employees steal from employers, you'll see where they try to, blackmail can be a very dangerous thing in society today. And in society, it could be made up. But when you look at how it works and how it plays out, you think about all this disrespect that's always trying to get the upper hand. Get the upper hand so I can push the other person down. Well, that's continual war that someone has going on with you show me disrespect, I'll show you more disrespect. And of course, that never leads to a peaceful solution. It never has, and it never will. Continuing on, it says, if you're faced with a choice to retaliate against someone, then you are faced with an immoral choice. Always decide on the choice that will not cause physical or emotional harm to yourself or someone else. Now think about it. You need self-control in all aspects of your life because you cannot do just anything you want to do. And that goes to all of us. We can't just go around doing things or acting like we own the world. Everybody around us is here to make sure that what I need goes the way I want it to go. If we live like that, you actually, could you imagine if you were given rule in your community, or let's say your city, and you decided to start changing all the things about your city without having any knowledge of the city, without having any knowledge of the budget that goes on and the requests that people have made. We have a city here in Abilene of like 160,000 people. Could you imagine taking over the city and not considering anything that the people had said? Just, I'm going to start doing it my way. I don't like that park here. I'm going to tear that down. I'm going to put it over here now. And people complain about the most interesting things. But when you have people that are paying their tax dollars into your city, they expect to get something, like roads without potholes, or, and the road they only see is the road in front of their house. They don't see the rest of the roads. It's only the one in front of their house is the one they see. But of course, these are things that we feel. When you feel you've put into something and you're not receiving something out of it, you feel as though you're disrespected. So turn over to page 122, these possible outcomes that come up. And of course, we can't give an ideal solution to every problem because every problem has its own little ingredients that go to it. And everything has to truly be considered. And sometimes you're going to have to deal with some things that it's going to rile some feathers. It's going to bring up some disturbances, but your goal has to be to find a peaceful solution to the problem that's there. Not to instigate, not to demoralize, not to put down, not to get the upper hand, but to just see what is the end result. What would it take to bring morality to this situation? What rules have been broken, and what would it take to fix this situation? What rules need to be applied? And of course, some people don't, as we talked about before, they're not really interested in keeping the rules. They're interested in themselves. They're not interested in being a benefit to society. And we see that a lot in society, and that can be very difficult to deal with sometimes. But looking back here to LP5D, we're looking at procedure 5. It says, explain to students that it is normal to feel the primary emotion of embarrassment, rejection, and humiliation when someone disrespects us. However, by using self-control, we can learn to deal with these emotions appropriately rather than resorting to anger to hide our hurt feelings. Have students read the section self-control in your emotions, and positive communication helps you deal with disrespect, found on pages 122 through 124 in their handbooks. Have students complete the accompany exercise on page 123. Stress to students that responding with anger and retaliation will only make a bad situation worse. So whenever you retaliate, whenever you do something that's demoralizing, or you do something out of anger, you do something to belittle, you're trying to not really solve a problem, but you're just adding fuel to the fire, it's only going to become worse. And looking over here to page 122, the very top of the page, it says, you have no control over what other people say and do. You can only control the way you respond. And that's a very important thing to remember, because that doesn't mean that people are always going to say and do nice things about you. Say nice things or perform nice things. It could be some very negative things sometimes. But what determines the kind of person that we are is how do we respond when these things are done? What actions do we take and what do we do? That truly is what determines who we are, and also determines what our reputation will become. We can be known as someone that they'll do anything to kind of get their way, or someone that truly seeks to follow the rules to have the best possible outcome. Because the rules are really, remember, they're there to keep us safe. They're there to keep society working smoothly. That's what they're there for. So looking down here, self-control in your emotions. Disrespect can trigger many different emotions, such as embarrassment, humiliation, and rejection. These emotions are called primary emotions because they are what we first feel when the disrespectful situation occurs. As you already know, emotions can affect the way you think and behave. An important part of responding appropriately to disrespect is learning to identify your primary emotions and then use self-control to manage them. So self-control is an extremely important part. Remember that we read on page 4 of the self-control unit that it's the very foundation of a positive character. Everything that's built for a positive character starts with self-control. And we're going to look back to chapters 2 and 3 of the self-control unit. If we could have our first slide. And this was found on page 33 of the self-control unit. It was called Let's Take a Closer Look. And it said, although all emotions can affect the way we behave, there are some emotions that have a greater potential to lead to negative behavior. And the very first one was anger. Now, anger is a normal emotion that is experienced by everyone, so we all go through this. However, it is actually a secondary emotion, and that's why we first started out by saying embarrassment, humiliation, and rejection, these are primary emotions. Anger, however, is a secondary emotion. This means that anger is felt as a result of other emotions that have not been appropriately resolved. So whenever you feel this, there could be a breakdown. Doesn't mean that if you're upset with something, it doesn't mean that you're not controlling that, because remember, anger is a normal emotion. We'll get to what it means when anger gets out of hand. And we've covered that. For those of you that are not aware, that if you want to put it in your notes there, the second and third chapter of the self-control unit, and just to give you one page is not enough, because that is a lot of detail that goes through those two chapters about these emotions and also dealing with them. Now this means that anger is felt as a result of other emotions that have not been appropriately resolved. Frustration, embarrassment, annoyance, and jealousy are all noticed primary emotions that, if left unchecked, can result in anger. And then, of course, going on to the next slide, this was found on page 34 of the self-control unit, and it's called Not Just Skin Deep. Emotions, whether negative or positive, are powerful. And that's something we have to understand and remember. They are powerful. They have the capacity to affect you both physically and mentally. Physically, emotions can cause us to experience intense reactions within our bodies. For instance, some emotions can cause a flushed face, like when you are embarrassed, faster breathing, as when you are angry, butterflies in the stomach, and goosebumps on the skin, like when you are nervous or afraid. Mentally, emotions can result in feeling energized or worn out, satisfied or discouraged, motivated or depressed. If not managed appropriately, some emotions can result in serious physical and mental illness. So think about that. The emotions themselves can actually bring someone down to the point of sickness, to where mentally or physically ill. Now I want to go into the next slide. This was from page 45 in the self-control unit, and it was about keeping things in perspective. Negative thoughts and strong emotions can cloud our ability to see things in perspective and increase the opportunity to act irrationally. Remember, we talked about acting impulsively, not truly considering the outcome of our choices. Doesn't mean that we did something and we weren't thinking. We've already covered that we think about everything we do. Every choice begins with a thought. But sometimes we like to say that, I did it without thinking. But the truth is, we did think about it. Whether it was a split second or not, we just don't consider the outcome of our actions. Now, to see a situation in perspective means to be able to view things in their proper order of importance without overreacting. Even though certain situations can trigger strong emotions, it's up to you to control how you respond. Remember, no one else can control that. It's up to us to control how we respond. Now, going back to page 122, it says primary emotions. Don't hide behind anger. Primary emotions, if not managed appropriately, can hide behind a secondary emotion called anger. So that's the initial emotion, whether it be embarrassment, jealousy, rejection, humiliation. That's the initial. Remember, we called those anger triggers. Now, anger tells us we are experiencing something that we do not agree with. And that's simply what anger is. It's something that we do not agree with. Now, does that mean that all anger is acceptable? If you're angry over a rule that has been created to keep people safe and you don't like that rule and you're mad because you have to keep it, well, that's not acceptable. But if you're angry because someone is not keeping the rule, like you're driving down the road and someone ignores a stop sign and pulls right out in front of you, well, that's an acceptable way to, if you're displeased with that, that's acceptable. But if you chase them down, start hitting them with your car, we call that road rage. That's uncontrolled anger. That's not just saying that you're not in agreement with what they did. Now you're seeking retaliation and revenge. And that's never acceptable. Once anger has turned to where someone is seeking physical or verbal aggression or violence, that is always negative. It's never a positive thing. It's easy to do and it's easy to justify, but it's still not right. When it comes to disrespect, anger can be a big problem. Notice there it's in all capital letters and bold black. Because there is a tendency to respond with anger to disguise the fact that our feelings are hurt. In other words, when someone is treated with disrespect, he might initially feel rejected, humiliated, or frustrated. Instead of following those feelings, he responds with anger by cursing and yelling. An angry response will not solve the problem. It will only lead to more disrespect. So once again, an angry response will not solve the problem. Underline that, circle it, highlight it. That's very easy to read. It's very easy to tell someone else that. But to apply it in our situations, in our everyday life, that's something we have to keep reminding ourselves of. What is the final goal? What is the purpose? What is it that I'm actually trying to achieve? And do I actually want to be pulled off into this direction or into this direction just to get to that? When you think about it, sometimes, and I've seen this in schools before, sometimes situations can arise where anger and outburst, you can be trying to get from point A to point B and say, point B is 20 foot away. And we'll just say that's your goal of your classroom for that 1 hour class. But through disruptions and argumentation and disobedience and anger that's going out, you can walk 300 feet all over the place and still only be 1 foot toward your goal. And that can be very frustrating, especially if you're a teacher. That can be extremely frustrating because you feel like you're wasting your time. You feel like you're beating your head against the wall and you feel like you're not getting anywhere. But that's the way it feels in society for a lot of people. They feel like just to get a little bit ahead in life, they have to go so far out of the way just to get there. You know, and you think about what some people are willing to do just to get ahead in life. I mean, you're talking about people that'll walk 3,000 and 4,000 miles, you know, go through things that could cost them their lives. And this is just so they can try to get to what they think is a better life. Why people that are there are trying to go somewhere else to get to a better life. You know, it's like a circle that just keeps going and going and going. They always say the grass is greener on the other side. You know, and there's so many different responses that people have for that. And there's some that I could never share across the internet live. And then there's some where, you know, the best response I ever heard, the author of The Peaceful Solution told me one time, he said, you know, people always think the grass is greener on the other side. And you know why? And I didn't know what he was going to say. He goes, it's because they're always looking at the other side. They can't be thankful and look where they're at. They're always looking at what everybody else has got. That's what they want. He said, that's the problem with society. The only thing I want, the only property I want is the one that's next to mine. Well, that never stops, you know, and that's kind of the way of the United States. There, the only one they want is the one that's next to theirs. When you think about how these things all intertwine with each other, life can be extremely complicated, and our goal is to simplify it. So looking back here at the last sentence on the paragraph there, the one we were in, right down below the title, Don't Hide Behind Anger, it says, an angry response will not solve the problem, it will only lead to more disrespect, like adding fuel to a fire. Notice, have you ever witnessed an argument between two people who were angry? You've seen how quickly anger can get out of control and turn to mutual disrespect. In situations like these, people throw insults at each other and try to outdo each other with put-downs and hurtful words. You know, you think about that, when people who, you know, these are people that usually are supposed to be best of friends, you know, co-workers that work together. You can have people that, you know, can have been together 20, 30, 40 years. And you let one little emotional hiccup take place, and they can turn to the worst enemies like at the snap of fingers. And there's many situations you can see with that. You know, I always think politicians are the funniest ones. I look back, you know, 8 years ago at all these people that were bragging about a certain individual, and they were all gung-ho, and now I'm watching all of these people announce how they're going to run against this certain individual because he's crazy, he doesn't have any sense, and I'm not trying to promote or demote anyone. I just think it's ironic how, you know, at one time this was the best thing since sliced bread, and now I can't believe we do this again. You know, we do a lot of things again over and over and over that I can't believe we do in society, and even myself. But the point is, when we as a society start identifying, you know, we have a very angry society. We have a very disrespectful society. You know, when George Floyd died up in Minnesota, that caused a lot of protests. There was a lot of destruction. And you think about people that lived in Minnesota and other parts, you know, Seattle went through this, and we've seen some things in Ferguson, Missouri, over some things that took place with a young man there that died. And we traveled to these places, and we looked, and of course after the protests were over with, you just seen the burned down gas station and a burned down AutoZone, and that was pretty much it. The destruction was the only thing that was left. And whenever people feel like disrespect took place, and there have been disrespect that took place, that's very clearly seen. A lot of this is on video today. Burning down your city is not the way to deal with it. That's the city you live in. You're actually you're disrespecting yourself by destroying the city you live in. But this is the mentality of people. You know, they fight, they want their city to be a better place, and then when something takes place, they start destroying. Or as they were talking about in other cities, people coming in from other cities and doing this destruction, so they can go back home and enjoy the benefits of no one going into their city. But you think about this anger that's fueled, and sometimes there's organizations that are fueling this anger, you know, and I'm not going to bring up a couple, but I'll just say everything matters. All things matter, and I'll leave it at that. Every choice in life matters. Every individual in life matters. Everything matters. And that's the whole part of what we talked about with respect. Everything deserves respect. And when it doesn't get respect, these emotions are going to come up. And when people when you're trained to deal with emotions, it can still be extremely difficult to get them under control. It takes a lifetime to develop this. But when people have not even been trained to deal with these emotions, they're going to get out of hand very quickly. So looking here on page 123, it says, if uncontrolled, anger can quickly turn to rage. Rage is an unhealthy and often destructive way of expressing angry feelings. It is characterized by explosive outbursts of both verbal and physical aggression. It is up to you to use self-control to manage your anger so that it does not turn to rage. So notice, it's up to us to manage, to process this anger to make sure that it does not turn to rage. You can also use self-control to avoid retaliating if someone is angry and treats you disrespectfully. Now that's something that can be very, very hard to do. It's not easy to do. It's a challenge to do. And before we get into these scenarios, I'd like to go to the next slide and remind ourselves about the facts about anger that we found on page 58 in the self-control unit. And the very first fact is, no one ever makes you angry. And we just read that in the respect unit, and that's what we built off of, was this part of the self-control unit. Notice, you choose to become angry. Whether you realize it or not, you make a conscious choice to respond to an individual or situation with anger. Anger, like all other emotions, is fueled by your thoughts and how you understand the world around you. Notice, how you understand the world around you. You can have 10 different people and have 10 different perspectives, have 10 different opinions. Just look at putting people together, and they're going to give you their opinion of what they've experienced, and everything will be based off of what they've been taught. And you can take a person from California, a person from Kansas, a person from Texas, a person from Arkansas, New York City, North Carolina, Louisiana, and Washington State, put them all together and ask them something, and they'll have very different opinions. Why? Because they've been trained very differently. You have very different things, even down to the foods that are eaten and how they're prepared, because they're done very differently. And then, if you really want to get crazy, take people from different countries and put them all together. Then you really start getting different perspectives. Now, does that mean that everybody's perspective is wrong? No, it doesn't. If a way a person views something doesn't bring harm to themselves, someone else, or the environment, there's nothing wrong with it. And there's a lot of ideology that are in many other countries that the United States could benefit from if it was implemented. We could benefit from in our lives if it was implemented. And, of course, there's ideology the United States has that would be beneficial to others too. But we always focus on the disagreements, and you'll always hear politicians say, well, it's what is in the interest of the United States, or it's what in the interest of Russia, or China, or Iran, or Venezuela, or Saudi Arabia. But they're only looking out for their interest. Well, as a society, we have to look out for the interest of not only ourselves, but for everyone else. If the only person we ever look out to, protect, to be respectful to be a benefit to only ourselves, then we're not really going to fit into society very well, because society is, we talked about, it rotates, it works, it engages, it takes all of us. We're interdependent. It takes all of us to make up this society. And one person's decision will affect many other people. Sometimes people who are leaders, like in the United States, whether it be Congress, Senate, or President, they can make decisions that affect many, many people they've never met. Where, if we're just, if we have a family, our decisions might only affect our wife, our children. If we're a single person, we might think that our decision only affects us, but what if your decision is, well, I'm not paying my car payment this month. Nope, I ain't paying it no more. I've paid enough. I think I paid all I should. After you signed a contract, said you would pay this amount, well, no, I'm done. That's it. Well, that's going to affect someone else when they come take the car, too. And if you've ever seen someone, I tell you what, I have seen, and I did this for a classroom setting one time, and I had another teacher tell me about it. And it was about how people do not keep their word, they break their vows, and then they get mad when the consequence comes. And it was showing repo men going and collecting vehicles. And I didn't know, but I looked it up. That is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. Those people will literally kill you for taking something that they broke their word with. You know, and you think about it, it's like, you would think someone would call, hey, I'm not going to be doing this anymore, I can't do it, explain why they can't do it, you know, can I deliver it? Not even send someone to pick it up. Where can I deliver this to? I picked it up at the car lot, I took it from the car lot, surely I could return it somewhere. You know, and I think you'd find that people would be more respectful. You know, banks would be more lenient with you if you would do that. But that's not the way society operates, sadly. Not everyone. But all of these are forms of disrespect. And think about what it shows, you know, your children or other people. And it can be the same way with a house. You know, it can be the same way with borrowing someone's lawnmower. And, well, I'm not done with it yet. When will you be done with it? When summer's over with, I'll be done with it. You know, I need it the whole summer. If you need one, you shouldn't have let me borrow it. Go get another one. And some people have that attitude. And I tell you, you might think that that's rare, but it's not. If you look out into society, you'll find out that it is very common. Looking to the next slide, it's another fact about anger. And it's about anger as a secondary emotion. And that's what we've been talking about so far in this part. We're building off of page 58, where we went over this in the self-control unit. Anger is a secondary emotion. In other words, when someone says something to us that we disagree with, we usually do not feel angry immediately. Although it might seem as if anger is instantaneous, anger is produced by other emotions such as embarrassment, disappointment, hurt, annoyance, and even fear. And if you've ever seen, you know, and this is the best example I can give anyone. I remember being this way when I was a child, and I see my children do the same thing. They'll come to you smiling, joyful, they're just, you know, it's the sales pitch that comes with what they're getting ready to ask you. Hey, can I get so-and-so, or can I get this? And they're smiling, and no, you can't get that. You don't need that. And then you see the disappointment because the bottom lip touches the forehead. And then after that, you see the feet start stomping off, and away they go. But before they got angry about the answer, you know, they got disappointed. You know, they felt like it could be a yes, but I got to sell it. I got to look like I'm really joyful about this. And then when they get the answer, it's like, well, I thought you were just joyful. What took place? How did you get mad so fast? Well, I want this. Well, if you can explain to me the benefits of having it, I'll listen further. But if you can't start telling me the benefits of getting this, then I don't know why we should discuss it any further. And the first benefit is always because I want it. Well, that's not a benefit. You know, I wanted a lot of things too growing up, and I spent a lot of money, worked a lot of years, spending stuff on doing things that I would have had every penny back that I wasted. You know, and I can tell you, and I'll share something with you that I would never encourage anyone else to do. But when I was young, you know, and I got my car, I wanted to make it a show car, and I decided, you know, I seen somebody that had a very expensive stereo system. I'm not talking about, you know, 6x9s in the back of the car. I'm talking about car show where you go to sound off competition and you have thousands of watts, and you have to change out your alternator, and you have backup batteries, and all of these things are done to where it will blow your trunk open. And when I was young, I thought, that's what I want to do right there. And I think I worked for 3 years, and almost every penny I made, I put into stereo equipment. And I think I ended up spending close to $30,000 on that stuff, and that was back in the early 90s. And then the day came, I got tired of it, and it was not fun anymore, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to sell this stuff. Man, you couldn't sell that thing for a penny on the dollar. I bet I didn't get $5,000 for all that stuff. And what did me and all of my wisdom do? I went to the beach. You know, I thought, I've never seen the ocean before, I'm going to go to the beach. So I went to the beach for like 3 days, and I paid close to $30,000 for that in reality. That's really what I did. And, you know, when I was young, I thought, I got so many more years to work, who cares? And I started thinking about how long I worked for that and how much money I spent for that. And you start realizing I just threw away an enormous amount of time for something so foolish. But you know what? And my parents, they were telling me, well, it's your money, you can do what you want to do, but I wouldn't do it. But you're working, it's yours, and, you know, you're not breaking any rules. I just thought it was the coolest thing until after it wasn't cool anymore. And then, but those are things you look back and you think, man, I would love to have the knowledge I have now and go back and redo that again. But I realized I'd probably do something else just as dumb, but it would be something else. And these are things that you start getting older and you start realizing I'm running out of time to stop making bad choices. Sooner or later, I don't want to be in my 90s going, I shouldn't have did that when I was in my 80s. There comes a time where we have to start using some common sense. And who can we be angry at? Only ourselves. That's the only person we can be angry at because of the choices we make. But once again here, moving on to this facts about anger. If you could go to the next slide. Anger that is uncontrolled can turn to rage. Now, anger is a normal emotion. And once again, we're reading the facts about anger found on page 58 of the self-control unit. Anger is a normal emotion, but the way we choose to respond might be anything but normal or healthy. Remember, we just read how these emotions can physically and mentally bring us down. And I think the number one thing that a lot of people can experience is anxiety, but also depression. I think at one time in our lives, if you live long enough, you're going to go through some form of depression. And I've realized that in life, the older you get, sadly, a lot of the people that you're friends with will start dying off if you live long enough. And that itself can bring a form of depression. Because you start seeing that life goes on, and if it's somebody you're really close to, it can be difficult to get your focus back in moving forward and doing what is right and going and continuing, on in a right path, especially if it was a teacher, or someone that made a difference in your life. But when anger is expressed in healthy ways, people are able to resolve their differences in a peaceful manner. Anger that is expressed in unhealthy ways can result in someone being hurt or property being damaged. This is called rage. Rage is dangerous. Excessive anger. People who are enraged lose their ability to think clearly, start thinking like a madman or like a rabid animal. They become driven to lash out verbally or physically. Rage has led people to inflict serious physical injury on others and even to commit murder. And I think about, I just seen recently, it seems like every time you see horrible news it comes out of Mexico sometimes. And I've seen where there was a place in Guadalajara where there was 8 people that decided to quit their job they had. They were working at a place where they were scamming people for property down in Mexico. And for one reason or another, they decided to quit working there. Well, kind of hard to quit when the cartel runs the business. So they found them all dead because they got together, they wanted to quit, and that was the result. Now that's a tragic thing that takes place in society, but think about what some people live through. Think about what some people have to go through to where you feel like, I can't do this anymore. This is wrong. I have to make a right choice. When that right choice could cost you your very life. We sit here in the United States and, yeah, there's a lot of bad things in the United States. There's a lot of things that need to be fixed, but it's a lot better than other places. It could be a lot worse here. And some people live in a society to where sometimes it could cost you your life. Just making the right choice could literally cost you your life. And that's a sad part of society because that's where there's a breakdown. But looking to the next slide here, this is what we can look like sometimes. We create our own anger by the way we think, our attitude, and our choices. So it's our attitude, the way we think, and our choices that literally is what is used to create our anger, and this replaying it over and over and over and over in our minds. We have to be mindful that when we replay a situation over, we're thinking about the solution to the problem. We're not thinking about all the ingredients that led to the problem, but the solution to the problem and how can we start finding an answer to that. Well, let's continue on here on page 123. We'll have a couple more things to pull in our slides, but we want to continue on here to get to the scenarios that we have. And here we see, 2 friends that are, of course, you can see they got their test results back, and we're going to read the scenario. and then we'll go through the questions. And it says that Laura was upset because she did poorly on her exam. Tamika, on the other hand, did well even though she did not study. Not realizing that Laura was upset, Tamika said, "Hey, guess what? I got an A and I didn't even study." "Shut up," Laura replied. "Leave me alone." As if that was not bad enough, she said it in front of a group of their classmates who immediately started laughing and making fun of Tamika. Of course, in here you'll have some questions and you'll want the classroom to help respond. And when you think about it, you think about unintentional disrespect. When someone is sitting there and they're excited, and some people I've met people that have memories that I am shocked at the things that they can remember. They can read a book and remember almost everything in that book. And I've met one person in my life that they have what they call a photographic memory. I met them in Washington, D.C., and I was amazed how a person could you could pick out a page and they could tell you what was on the page. Literally start reading the sentence. And I was impressed by that. Didn't make them a better person, though, but I was still impressed by it. But here you have someone who got a grade that was, a surprise. I got an A and I didn't even have to study. And it could be somebody that some people just pick things up naturally. They're able to adapt to them. And then you have someone here who probably studied very hard. It could be something very difficult. For me, when I was in school, general math and algebra came easy. When I got into calculus, that was not easy. I had to work at that. But I had classmates that it seemed like it was one of the easiest things that they could do. And I never could get it to where it was easy for me. And you're just talking about formulas. But, for some reason my mind couldn't wrap around it that easy. But theirs did. It was very impressive. I regretted signing up for that class for a whole year. Didn't help me, but I still regretted it. And when I went to high school, and I'm pretty sure it's the same way, you get to pick what classes you want. And of course I thought, well, I'll need this in life. Well, I didn't really need it in life either. I didn't go into a field that would have called for me to use it for my job. But here you see this, how was Laura disrespectful to Tamika? Well, Laura was rude to Tamika. Well, how was she rude? Well, she got upset. She got upset because this person said that they'd made a great grade, they didn't study. The other person obviously had put in a lot of time, but didn't get what they wanted. And then, why was Laura disrespectful? You notice the answers might vary, but they could include Laura was disappointed that she received a poor grade and jealous that Tamika got an A. Especially when she goes, "I didn't even study." And if Laura had actually been studying, and Laura had been applying herself, and then she still got a poor grade, that can be disappointing for someone else to come by and go, "I didn't even try, and look how it worked out." That can be frustrating. Notice what might be some of Tamika's primary feelings. Well, the answers might vary, but they could include Tamika would be shocked because she did nothing to warrant Laura's rude behavior. She might feel embarrassed because her classmates laughed at her. And then, of course, here in the fourth one, if Tamika does not use self-control and responds with anger, how could that affect the situation? Explain your answer. Well, if Tamika does not practice self-control, her response could make the situation worse. By responding with anger could lead to verbal or physical violence. You could look at someone, call them stupid. There's many things that people can do to make other people feel worse about themselves. And not all of us learn at the same pace. That's one thing that we have to, as teachers, you kind of don't realize that when you're in a classroom. I think I went all the way through high school not realizing that everybody in that classroom learns at a different pace. And I was probably 23 years old before I had a teacher actually come to me and tell me that when you're teaching a class, you can only move as fast as your slowest student. If you move any faster than that, you're going to start losing people. And of course, they reminded myself and other teachers that you learn from repetition. Never feel as though saying something one time is enough. Repeat it, and repeat it again. And after you repeat it 100 times, you can ask them, and you'll realize you still got 100 more times to go. And then they'll finally get it down. And I realized, that's exactly how I learned, that people have to repeat things to me. And sometimes, I can quote something and I'll be off a little bit. And it's always great to have someone to come to you and go, hey, this is really what it says here. You missed this word right here. You got to put this word with it. And you know what? Those are things we should be thankful for when people come and point those things out to us to remind us. Because nothing's worse than telling somebody, oh, you need to put half a cup of sugar in that, or was it salt? I'll put salt in it. Salt will be better. Just do that. Sometimes it's important. If you want to get the results, it's important to get those things and what we need to do. Looking at the next slide, though, and this is out of page 61. The question of the day, why do we get angry? And once again, the self-control unit, page 61. We often get angry because we experience something that is unpleasant or our expectations were not met. That doesn't make it okay. Sometimes it can be, sometimes it's not. People get angry for many reasons. These reasons are called triggers. From the previous chapter, and this is speaking of the self-control unit, from the previous chapter, you learned that a trigger causes something to occur. A trigger could be something that provokes, frustrates, or aggravates us. A trigger could be a person, a situation, or an experience. On other occasions, it is our own false perception that trigger our anger. Because we are all unique individuals, what provokes one person might not necessarily provoke another. However, it is fair to say that many people experience similar triggers or anger traps from time to time. In other words, once you choose to be angry, a particular trigger can consistently invoke angry feelings. The following is an exploration of some of these anger triggers. And of course, we just gave an example of something that took place with an anger trigger, but you'll notice these when you get into where they become a habit. A lot of people call them pet peeves. The things that really, pushes buttons. If you do this right here, you'll get this guy upset. Guaranteed. I remember a classroom of students one time. If they were dealing with an assignment they didn't want to deal with, they knew how to get out of it by aggravating a teacher. I didn't get them out of the assignment. They still had to go through the assignment, but they knew how to prolong it. And of course they realized once they got older they were stealing from themselves. That's who they really affected and who they really hurt. But I want to get onto this one before we get into the next page. This will be our last slide for tonight, but this is one of the most important slides. You are responsible, if we could put the last slide up, you are responsible for controlling your anger. No one can make you angry, and no one can control your anger except you. In the same manner you choose to be angry, you can also choose to handle anger in appropriate ways. You can choose to avoid causing harm to yourself or to others. Controlling your anger means making a conscious choice not to let your anger get the best of you or not allowing it to turn to rage. By being aware of your anger triggers and anger style, you can take steps that will lead you to making a positive choice, even when you feel angry. Sometimes it means, the old saying, I've got to bite my bottom lip, and hope I don't bite it in two. I've been in situations before where I can tell myself I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. Got my mind set on it, and after 5 minutes, there goes my mouth running. And sometimes we feel like that the point is going off direction. It's not something that, there's more explanation that needs to be involved, or, something's being said that is very contrary. But even if those things are true, being angry doesn't fix the situation. And being angry will never fix the situation if it turns into rage or name calling or disrespect. Those things never fix the situation. If something, of course, is wrong, it can always be addressed, it can always be discussed, but to be argued about, there's no peaceful solution in that. A discussion is one thing, an argument is another. So think about that as we turn over to page 124. Page 124, and of course this is the last page here found in Procedure 5. And we might get through this, we'll try. But positive communication here, notice, helps you deal with disrespect. Positive communication. By using self-control, you can avoid becoming angry or enraged and learn to manage your primary emotion. The most effective way to deal with primary emotions is to stop and think, that's the STOP acronym we discussed, about how the situation is actually making you feel. Rejection and embarrassment are strong emotions that indicate that something has occurred that hurts us emotionally, but they are not excuses to respond to anger. And notice here we have something written to us by Sam, who's 12 years old. It says, "Dear Peaceful Solution, when my feelings are hurt, I feel like crying and my face turns red. It's bad enough that someone is disrespecting me without me crying and looking like a wimp. Acting like I'm mad so that I don't cry doesn't really help either. What should I do?" And that's a question to pose to your class. What should a person do? Acting angry is not a way to solve a situation. You always have to first consider, and once again, you can line up 10 people and you can have something that will, the same situation, and 10 people get angry over one situation. They will have, sometimes you can have 10 different points of view of why each person is angry. It's not all the same because everybody will view it through their perspective, through their education level, through their experiences in life. And some people where you might have people that have been through something and they tell you, let me tell you, I've been through that. And let me tell you, this is how it plays out. And they can relate. It won't be exact, but it can relate. And then you can have people that's never been through something. And, it's hard for that person to relate to a situation. But these are things to where when the very basic rules of morality and self-control are applied and we consider our anger styles and anger triggers, the ideology that we can put forth in it will actually get us going in the right path. And, we can try to make decisions based without having to experience the negative things in life. You don't want to, and you think about, sometimes people think, and I've heard it say, experience is the best teacher. Every time I touch a saw, I don't want to have to cut my finger off to know that I should have used it a better way. I don't want to have to hurt myself with a tool. I don't want to have a car wreck by running a stop sign to go, stopping was really important. I'll try that next time. That's not a great sign when you're waiting on the ambulance to come scrape you out of the vehicle. But sometimes, it doesn't have to be a stop sign you're running through. It can be a situation that there's just a lot of emotions tied into things. And you can have a group of people that are all looking to make the right choice. But you'll have many different opinions. You can have a city council of 5 like we have here in our communities of Abilene and Callahan County out here. And I can guarantee you there's some heated disagreements on those city councils when it comes into how things should be appropriated. Look at the bills that are passed in Washington, D.C. I noticed one Congress lady who was extremely angry about this last bill that got pushed by raising the credit limit so the government didn't default. Like, raising your credit limit makes you not default. You're not paying your bills, you're still defaulting. But she's mad and she's screaming. And she said, my community got nothing out of this package. Which tells you other people got something out of that package. They call it pork barreling. Well, she was mad because she didn't get anything. And you know what? It's those people that vote her in office. And they're going to be wondering, how did these people get something, but you didn't get anything for us? Well, that's what takes place. And, like I said, if you ever want to see disrespectful communication, just turn C-SPAN on. And you'll see them going at it. I've seen people on C-SPAN arguing and complaining and griping, and then when they show the auditorium, there's not a soul in there. Everybody's done left. The only people are there that's running the actual meeting itself. No one there to listen. But they have their monitors playing, and it's being recorded. It's on the TV, and they're hoping to get some news time to get it out there. So we're going to stop right here on page 124. Of course, that way that'll give William time he'll cover back the very top of this to get into the very bottom, and then we'll move forward. But these are all important parts that we need to apply into our lives. And of course, communication is something we have every day. And positive communication is something that it can change the outlook on society. It can make life better. Our next class is going to be the 11th. It'll be this coming Sunday, so June the 11th at 5:30, and we look forward to seeing all of you back at that time. Thank you once again.